Costello woke to an empty bed. His instinct told him Avery left. He hated that his mind rushed towards pessimism, but he could never seem to wrangle it in. As the day took hold of his thoughts and senses, he heard Avery in the living room. "How's my beautiful shaman doing on this bright and wondrous morning?" Costello projected across his apartment. She didn't answer. He could clearly sense someone was in his apartment, and now he's hoping for damn sure it's her. He walked past the bathroom and all the toiletries he would oddly focus on. Costello found Avery fixed on the television with coffee delivered from the cafe downstairs. "We're having coffee delivered today? Interesting. What's the occasion?" Costello asked. Avery responded, "I woke up to notifications about a bus bombing in Helsinki. Couldn't focus on making coffee, so I rang downstairs and they rushed up a carafe. Rather nice amenity, actually." Costello quickly forgot about the coffee being delivered and just poured himself a cup. He was also focused on the news of this bombing now. They discussed whether it had been determined to be terrorism. Seemed like a silly question, but terrorism has evolved so much in the past few years. It was typically members of an international group looking to motivate a government, but countries had started becoming so divided within. A rash of attacks began occurring by natives to their own soil and people over issues once considered debatable civilly. People were beginning to find it harder and harder to amalgamate amongst each other because of politically and ideologically charged differences. Costello clasped his coffee cup firmly and awaited more news about the bombing. He'd traveled to Scandinavia and found the people to be so peaceful and grounded when it came to ideological differences. They were such small countries with fear of invasion from larger surrounding, not-so superpowers. He spoke with so many who gave him a very heavy vibe that their unity was a strength that couldn't be broken by even the worst of populist rhetoric. He was sure this had to be a horrible attack by Chechens, who had begun a ground attack on peaceful northern European countries after Russia failed to occupy Ukraine and surrounding countries a couple years prior. It seemed like every time Costello began to find his stride, something distracted him. He knew there wasn't much he could do regardless of the outcome of this bombing. It just saddled him with immense grief about the world as a whole. All his flipping through the Bible and truly listening to people, rather than blowing them off for a better time elsewhere, clouded his mind with so many questions. Here he has possibly done something egregious and was ready to own up to whatever it was. He was the observer in a world of horrible people whose aim was greed and revenge. He often wonders why he gave a shit about a single thing he does, while the world was filled with mutants who intentionally do things 100 times worse than anything he could even fathom. Sometimes he had to just come to terms with the fact and keep reminding himself. He is who he is because of those who molded him into this version of himself. There was nothing on earth that could take that away from him, no matter what the outcome, even if he didn't like it. Costello started rifling through drawers, and he asked Avery if she'd help him look for an old framed photo of him with Grands and his friends from the racetrack. The revelation flashes an image through his head he couldn't shake. It encapsulated so much in one capture. Costello up in the foreground with Grands and Constance taking a picture normally, just as anyone would expect. Although in the background, there was an unknown man pickpocketing another man in plain sight. While those unaware of this broad daylight crime in progress were smiling their best for the camera, two others could be seen observing it in plain sight. Ben is peeking to his right, watching the pickpocket with a clear milquetoast stare, almost as though he could care less. Then there was Dahlia, pulling herself right out of the ethos of the photo, giving the crook and the world her 2 cents with a gigantic look of disgust. Costello held on to this photo as a memento of Grand's, but it wasn't until now that he realized how much of the world's character was captured. Avery found the photo and gave it to Costello so he could dust it off. It was just as he remembered. He took a moment to reflect on Grand's. He truly missed him. Getting a good look at him in the photo helped Costello realize that notwithstanding his mother and Grand's, he wouldn't be who he was today. He knew deep down he garnered traits from his father, just not the ones he connected with on an emotional level. Most of the indoctrination from his father was helpful with survival and maintaining a bit of a cunning demeanor when necessary. The caring and compassion was what got Costello out of bed every day. Without the lessons of love and empathy, all the will to survive bullshit is just a dystopian hamster wheel. Now for Ben. Benjamin Drury was a low-life hang-around who Grands and the others at the track sympathized with because of his obvious solitude. Grands told Costello one day at the track about how they brought Ben into their seats. Ben had 2 major flaws. He was a raging alcoholic and a miserable loser at just about everything. Grands was a people watcher, not in some creepy stalker style, but just always keeping an eye on those around him. He noticed Ben showed up at the track one day and brought his drunkest loud mouth he could muster. He watched as Ben lost race after race while elevating his blood alcohol by the minute. Ben was oddly a liqueur drinker. He said he didn't care if people could smell the booze on him because he wasn't there to impress anyone. So he would sip low-proof liqueurs all day and ultimately wind up more drunk than any of the other booze hounds hiding behind the clear, quiet aroma of vodka. Grands decided to engage with Ben. One day, he told him he noticed he spent most of his days alone at the track and would like to invite him to join their group on one condition. He could either give up the booze and keep losing or start winning and keep on boozing. Grands couldn't stop laughing when he told Costello this story because he loved doing impressions of Ben. Grands said Ben wasn't sure even how to respond to the offer because it went so far over his head it had to check in with air traffic control. Ben assumed he could come on over and keep drinking so long as he won his races. This was absolutely true, except he couldn't pick a horse to save his life. So after the first race with the group that Ben lost, Grands told him to grab a Coke and toss the booze. It suddenly settled in with Ben. The beauty of the entire experiment was it worked. Ben wound up giving up drinking and shockingly started winning races. Even after he started winning, he never went back to drinking. Sadly, he never did change as a person. Grands said sometimes you just can't get the rod out of the tree. The photo of Ben watching someone pickpocket someone else just screamed who he was as a person. He was unfazed by the act, and the fraction of the second it took for the camera to show us that spoke every word you needed to know. Dahlia was the antipode of Ben. Her disgust with this thief was on display, and she wanted everyone to know. Some would refer to this as virtue signaling, while others see it as normalcy. Costello pondered the theory he often thought about time and time again. What defines what is bad? Does society have it right when we judge others on their actions? Of course, he knew in his heart of hearts the pickpocket angered him. However, he only knows that because of his personal upbringing. Countless others have never been taught right from wrong, and many others have been sadly taught to be horrible people. He constantly asked himself whether we were born as a blank slate or born evil. Dahlia's look of disgust looked forced. He knew that didn't mean she was a fake person, but it could mean she could have an emotion deep down that doesn't give one shit about the pickpocket, and she doesn't even know her own truth. Grands gave Costello the scoop on Dahlia as well. That was one thing that kept him coming back to the track. He was fixated on stories and details Grands would talk about. Dahlia was the youngest of the group. Born in 1951, she was the youngest boomer of the bunch, and according to Grands, she had an affinity for mezcal. a love of the connection the cactus had with the soil in the hands of the workers who harvested and mashed the agave. She hadn't spoken with her father in decades. Gran said this was the root of her virtuousness. Her father was a combat veteran in World War II. His infantry spent years in Italy, primarily during the Anzio campaign. After returning home, Command Sergeant Major Barbosa never returned abroad while still on active duty. Dahlia's father met her mother in Pasadena, where they went on to start a family. Dahlia had 3 sisters and a brother. When her brother passed away from leukemia, she learned about her father having a child in Rome. She never explained why her father came clean about the family in Rome, but she was never able to find peace with him. Dahlia went on to get her degree in psychology and became a child psychologist. Gran's always said he was terrified how many uptight little kids she brainwashed with her virtuous vengeance and sent out into the world. He laughed, but Costello always sensed Gran's had a bit of a crush on Dahlia. He could order her drinks verbatim and never failed to mention the name of her fragrance. Gran's had a tiny little charmer locked away somewhere beneath the armor. Costello would always remind himself good people can die alone, too, if they're too careful. He glanced over at Avery as this thought passed by, while taking a last look at the photo.